Well, indeed, the latest annual report of the Commission for Employment Equity, CEE, released in Pretoria this week, shows the slow but you could say steady erosion of white dominance in all but the highest levels of corporate South Africa. However, at the current pace of transformation, it will still be another 5 years before African men surpass white women, and that's going to be in 2023. And African women will only surpass their white counterparts as late as 2050. So the question tonight, is corporate South Africa transforming fast enough? We're joined from our Pretoria studios by Thembinkosi Mkalipi, who's the Chief Director of Labour Relations. Good evening to you, and thank you for your time. I suppose the broader question as we unpack these figures, the first thing to ask you, is the Employment Equity Act being complied with?
There are no doubt that there are a lot of challenges in this. As the reports indicate, that we've made really no movement since the last report, and it's an issue that big business in this country need to look themselves in the eye and indicate what is it that we need to do to ensure that the law is complied with.
I mean, if we look at some of the figures that have come out, 105 companies, 72 of them JSE listed, all failing to adhere to their own employment equity targets. Surely that's worrying.
That's definitely worrying, and that's why we are in the process of amending the law and making it possible for the minister to set targets for different sectors and ensure that they then meet those targets.
Part of the problem has been that sentences for non-compliance have been seen as light and non-consequential. Would you agree?
Not really. I mean, if you look at the law, I mean, companies that do not comply can be levied up to 10% of the turnover. The issue is twofold. I think maybe there is, on our side, failure to put the correct information in front of the courts to allow the courts to take those decisions, because the courts have tended to give far lesser fines in terms of non-compliance, precisely because the courts are worried about what will be the consequences of higher fines that are put on companies. Maybe we need to see and try and put more information in front of the courts. Why do we think that the courts should levy the fines that the law requires them to levy?
So because of those light sentences, a lot of companies have tended to find that the fines they're given are inconsequential.
Exactly. Companies can easily budget for this. I mean, 1.5 million for a JC registered company is nothing. I mean, it's just not even petty cash for these companies. Therefore, if we don't solve this problem, it's not going to be, there will be no pressure on companies to comply with the law.
So racism, sexism, discrimination against people with disabilities remain major obstacles in South Africa's transformation agenda. And we're really seeing that at this slow pace, it's going to be a number of years, perhaps even decades, before we see the dominance, particularly of white males, steadily decline.
You're correct. I mean, if we go on this rate, it's going to take more than a decade before any change takes place in terms of representation, specifically for African men and African women at the highest level. For that to reflect at the pace that we're going, it will mean more than a decade.
But in a sense, I mean, it's a reflection of how our economy is structured. If we look at the very top layers, we're talking about just over 60,000 people, when in fact, if you think about the formal sector employs as much as 7 million South Africans. We're talking about a very small number at the very top, with a very flat base, a very broad base, if you like.
There's no doubt that it make things easy to transform when the economy is growing. And then you correct that the base at the top that we're talking about, if we're talking about the top. But remember, transformation is not about the top only. It's about the top, the middle, and the bottom. I mean, we need to look at the whole structure of the economy and see how can we fast track transformation. But yes, if the economy is not growing, it makes it a little bit difficult in terms of transformation.
What's interesting is that, of course, at the level of professionally qualified workers, both African men and women already outnumber white men and women. And of course, if the 2017 trends persist, white women professionals will outnumber white male professionals by about 2032. So if anything, it is they who have gained the most significant advances in terms of how employment equity is being enacted.
There's no doubt, not only white females and even Indians have benefited. Employment equity was very good for them over the last 20 years. And we appreciate that because that was the intention. The next issue now is what is it that we need to do to make sure that the same applies to African women, to African men and colors.
Well, let's just look at some of the key findings of the report. White people occupy nearly 68% of top management jobs in South Africa. Over the past 20 years, there's been only a 1% decline in white incumbents in the most senior management positions. On the other hand, black Africans occupy just under 15% of senior management. So those are enormous disparities. Does it bring into question how employment equity perhaps needs to be reworked or reconsidered because it doesn't seem to be getting the gains as quickly as might be needed?
Yes, we agree. We need to rework how the system works. But if you look carefully on the report, you look on movement, there has been a lot of movement on white males resigning, promotion, and creating opportunities for other groups to be included in. And there has not been that intake from business when those opportunities arise. Therefore, we can't blame the whole problem on the economy that is not growing. There has been opportunities, as I've said, because of the movement that have taken place or in terms of dismissal, resignation, and promotions in the different levels. But the problem, the major problem is that when companies fill those vacancies that arises as a result of white men leaving, they replace it with white men.
Well, part of the problem is that if you're going to rely on the rate of attrition instead of actively finding ways to promote people to those positions without necessarily waiting for resignations or people being moved, it's certainly going to take a very, very long time, notwithstanding what you've just pointed out.
But you must remember that in terms of the law, you can't remove people from position in order to address transformation. Therefore, you can't ignore the national transition that is taking place, especially when the economy is not growing. When the economy is not growing, you've got to use all the opportunities that are there for transformation. Because if we go to companies and say, dismiss white males who are in position and appoint and deal with transformation, it's going to be unfair labor practice, those decisions. Therefore, that's why I'm saying the economy is not growing, but that doesn't mean that there are no opportunities to improve the situation, because there's a lot of movement at senior, at top management, at even at professionally qualified level, where people leave not because they are dismissed, because vacancies arise, because they've resigned, because they are retiring. And if employers had the need, they could have filled those posts by using.
Right, we'll have to leave it there with the Chief Director of Labour Relations, Thembinkosi Mkalipi, talking to us from our Pretoria studios. A lot of the criticism, of course, isn't necessarily around the dismissal of people, but whether or not corporate South Africa has sufficiently bought into employment equity as an imperative, and creative ways that need to be found to address the disparities that seem, at least according to this report, like they're going to be with us for quite some time.